Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is. Welcome to another Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. I've got a really special guest. I have the man behind the magical juice of Daou Family Estates. Daniel is a winemaker, and along with his brother, George, is co-proprietor of this beautiful Paso Robles winery. Daniel, welcome to the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast.
Thank you, Luke, for having me. It's a pleasure.
This is an honor, to say the least. Really remarkable story, to say the least, and it's nice to actually, I believe you're the first non-Napa Sonoma winery, except for Brut de Côte-Ménestrel. You were the first Paso Robles winery we've had on this podcast, so I appreciate you taking the time, and I love the background back there. So tell me what that is right behind you. Obviously, that's not where you're at right now, but tell me about it a little bit.
So you're looking at the wonderful Daou Mountain, where our winery is located, on the west side of Paso Robles. And, it looks actually that beautiful. And this is not a Photoshop picture. We're located at 2,200 feet elevation, which is the highest elevation in Paso. And it really gives us a very unique terroir, which honestly doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet. And I can drill into that, which is one of the reasons we like to call it a rare phenomenon, because what we have on Daou Mountain doesn't exist on planet Earth anywhere else.
Wow. So how did Daou Family Estates come to fruition? You've got a really, 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 really unique story. It's actually awesome, to say the least.
Thank you. Well, our journey starts in the country of Lebanon, where my brother and I were born. And when the Civil War started, we were unfortunately the first casualty of the war. Our family got wounded. Our mom being from France, we had obviously we're French spoken at home, and my mom had given us the French citizenship. So we immigrated to France, where we grew up most of our youth. I was 9 years old when I moved to France. And when we were 18 years old, we decided to immigrate to the United States. George and I both attended the University of California, San Diego, where we majored in electrical engineering for him and computer engineering for myself. And we fell in love with this country. We fell in love with the American dream and never looked back. Our career started in high tech, but it's an interesting journey how I ended up with this winery, because my passion had always been wine.
Mm-hmm.
I have such fond memories living in the south of France in Cannes, where my dad, would buy wine, would drink wine every day. And I have so many wonderful memories where he would drink wine every day, and I would sit with him, have a couple sips, and I would hear him get philosophical and jovial and happy and talk about life. And those are really moments that I cherished quite a bit growing up with my dad. So, in my early 20s, living in San Diego, I started collecting wine, and I became quickly consumed by it. And it wasn't just about drinking wine. I knew that I was called to really be a winemaker, but my career back then wasn't high tech. So, I was running a publicly traded company. But throughout my 20s, all I did is really envision what would a winery look like and what is the perfect terroir that I'm looking for when I finally decide to embark on this journey.
Awesome.
So in my early 30s, I spent about 8 years looking for what I considered, after reading books and studying all kinds of different things. I came to the conclusion that if I could encounter the kind of terroir that we have today on that mountain, it would really allow me to potentially make the best cab in the world. And it was a crazy dream. Now, what was this research based on? It really was. The research was based on basic terroir. As you know, the French word terroir comes from the word terre, which means earth. And it really describes many things, but it describes predominantly soil and climate. So soil and climate is all about location. And as you very well know, you have vineyards, for instance, in France, where there could be 10 feet between one vineyard and another. One is a first growth, selling for $7,000 a bottle and gets huge ratings. And the other one has a hard time selling the wine for 10 euros. So location, microclimates, soil and climate have a huge impact on the quality of the wine. So what is it that I was looking for that I thought would be a dream come true if I could find it? Well, let's start with soils. When you look at soil, if you consider almost every vineyard in Europe, doesn't matter where, Champagne, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Loire Valley, south of France, the Rhone region, Tuscany, Spain, Austria, Germany, even south of England, they all share one thing in common. Look, they share the same soil. That soil, we call it in French argilo-calcaire, which in English is calcareous clay. Now, there are many reasons why Europeans will only plant vines on these soils. Let me walk you through them. Well, you have two layers on the soil. Your first layer is clay. Now, what does clay give you? Clay is known for giving you great color. It's known for giving you fat and flesh in the wine, which is very important, and texture. Clay also is known for giving you a great nose, bouquet. So that floral characteristics you get from Cabernet Sauvignon grown on clay, that comes from clay. But clay alone doesn't cut it. Why? Because most vineyards in Europe have underneath that clay, and sometimes the clay could be a foot, sometimes it could be 6 inches, sometimes it could be 18 inches or more. Sometimes it's 3-4 feet of clay mixed in with gravel because over there it rains a lot to drain the water. But underneath all that, there's what's called a limestone subsoil. The limestone subsoil provides three things that are very, very unique. The first thing it does is it traps the water from the rainy season. It's a porous limestone, so it, like a sponge, captures it all. And during the growing season, you don't need to irrigate. It feeds that moisture to the root zone of the vine, allowing it to survive. Now, as you know very well, Europe does not allow irrigation. Now, there are a couple appellations where if you have a severe heat wave because of climate change and in August, you're allowed to maybe irrigate for a week. But generally speaking, European vineyards are all dry farmed because it's forbidden to actually suck the water resources and water the vines. Well, these are the only soils that allow you to dry farm. A regular clay soil is very difficult to dry farm because the water just go through. Same with loamy soil, even volcanic soil, even though it contains some rock, the water just go through because it's hard rock, it's not porous. It doesn't store that water. Obviously, dry farming is important because it really allows you to have a pure expression of what terroir is. It allows you to have very small, concentrated berries that really show that intensity in the wine. The second thing these soils provide, the subsoil, the limestone subsoil, is, wine is so much more than food and alcohol. I tell you, I travel to France back 3 times a year. Now we're in about 35 countries with our wines. So we have a huge presence in Germany and England. We're actually the number one sold, I believe, wine at the top retail store in the UK. And every time I go back to France, when I talk to my friends or I talk to people in the industry there, and I taste them on my wines, before they taste the wine, their comment is always the same. We don't like California wine. And I go, why not? Why not? And they're always telling me the same thing. Too much jam, too much marmalade. That's not because it's a bad thing, but that's because the European palate has been trained for centuries on tasting that earthiness and tasting that minerality that comes from these soils. So when you give them something that just relies on climate, not on the soil, which is half of the terroir, they taste it and they go, we don't like it. It almost seems like having dessert. And they want complexity. They want to taste the earth. Well, these limestone subsoil, they're very porous. So when you take, for instance, a slice and look at a vine after about 4 or 5 years, you'll notice that the roots grow and penetrate that limestone, and they draw minerality and earthy flavors in the wine, which the Europeans are used to. So the last reason why these soils are very important is, as you very well probably know, most Cabernets in California are acidulated. They're added tartaric acid at harvest. Why? Because most of the soils in California are not French. Therefore, they have very low pHs, and therefore you don't have a high level of calcium. Therefore, when the wines actually reach physiological ripeness, that acid's gone. So what the winemaker does, adds tartaric acid to actually drops the pH, increase acidity, and balance out the wine. Well, that's a technique that's forbidden, by the way, in many places in Europe. Why? Because you really are no longer producing a terroir-driven wine. You're producing a lab experiment. You're adding this and you're adding this and you're compensating this. Now, if you talk to winemakers, I've talked to many, they'll say, well, it's already there, so why not add it? Well, what I've found is you have to think of wine not as a product. It's not soda. It is a living organism. So it has a certain balance that comes from the vineyard. The minute you start messing around, and I always like to look at a piece of paper with 4 corners, right? You've got fruit, tannin, acidity, and alcohol. The minute you mess around with one of those things, what happens? The wine totally loses its balance. It's no longer a balanced wine. So what is the effect to a consumer? And I'm sure you've encountered that. You try a bottle of wine and it will bite you in the back of the jaw and scratch you right here because tartaric acid totally, disjointed the wine. It's no longer in balance. These soils are the only soils that allow you to hang as long as you want, even in places like California, and still achieve ripeness and make wines in the most natural way by only using two things: our native yeast and some nutrition for the yeast. So when you taste the wines, even when you taste them in barrel, they're already drinking great. Why? Because they don't need to go through years of finding back their balance if they ever do. So these soils are extremely unique. Now, you can probably guess by now the only bad news about these soils. You don't find them in California. You will never find them in California besides a couple places in the Central Coast. And the biggest chunk of them is on the west side of Paso Robles. And our mountain is 100% the same soils that you find in Bordeaux. So when I found that, you could imagine how excited I was. I mean, here I am. I'm thinking if I could just find the same soils as Europe, but in California. And why is it that I wanted to find them in California? Let's talk about that, because it almost sounds like I've been bashing California, and I hope that doesn't come out this way, because I love California and I love the wines that come from California as well. But the soils are just half the formula, Luke. The other half formula is actually the climate. Now, I have to tell you, and if you don't mind, I'm going to pull up a sheet here to remind me of the statistics. I don't remember them by heart, so we'll just take a second if you don't mind.
No worries.
So if you talk about climate, right? I have to tell you, California overall has a wonderful climate, right?
Yes.
A climate that allows you to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon almost on a yearly basis. So, you take a look at France, places like Bordeaux, other places, and what you get is 2 good vintages out of 10. Sorry, it's taking me a while longer to find this page, but it should be here any minute. Yearly storage right here. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
Here it is. Okay. So climate has a very, very different, California has a different climate. The kind of climate that really allows you to reach ripeness. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, again, if you go to a restaurant and you order a bottle of French wine, what's the first question? Is it a good vintage or bad vintage? Why? Because that same wine in a bad vintage is going to be awful, and you're going to pay the same price. In a good vintage, it's going to be rewarding. Well, California wines are good almost every year, right? We rarely have a bad vintage. So the climate is very conducive to ripening and achieving ripeness consistently year after year for varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, or Bordeaux varieties. Now, I have to tell you, though, if I got $1 for every time a journalist misrepresented the climate in Paso, maybe would have paid for the wine. Okay.
How many daughters do you have?
I have 4 daughters and 1 boy. 5
there you
children. Go. Exactly. So let's talk about climate, because you see, you're familiar with Napa, right? You're familiar with the North Coast.
Imagine, I'm familiar with all.
Okay. Imagine you came for the first time to Napa and you stayed in Carneros, where it's very cold, where they make sparkling wine. And you left there and you wrote an article about Napa and Sonoma. And you said, I've been to Napa and Sonoma, which in reality you just went to Carneros, and said, it's very cold there. I'm not so sure how they ripen Cabernet. That wouldn't be a very good statement, right? Okay. Right. The same thing happened with Paso. So let's talk about Paso. 614,000 acres. It is larger than Napa and Sonoma put together. So you could be 6 miles from the Pacific Ocean, and it's so cold that people have attempted to grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and they failed. So you can't do it. Or it could be you're 35 miles inland and it is so dang hot, you don't want to be there, let alone grow any grapes. You'll see 60 days at 100 degrees or more. So when journalists often come and critics come to Paso, especially they come in the summer, often June, July, August, they stay downtown. And yes, downtown can be very hot. And they'll leave there saying, boy, it was sure hot in Paso. And that makes no sense. So I want to give you some real statistics, because as you know, numbers don't lie, right? Numbers really cut through basically the subjectivity that a lot of people could infuse in their articles. So let's look at the last 2 years. A couple of things I want to look at. Number one, how many days reached 100 degrees or more? Because when you reach that 100 degree mark, Luke, First of all, you sunburn the grapes. You stop reducing sugar. You really stress the canopy. And overall, you degrade the quality of your wine. So you don't want to have too many days at 100 degrees. So that's one important thing. The second thing is to look at the average temperatures and see where were we at compared to other regions. So here it is. Okay, let's start with 2019. Number of days at 100 degrees or more in Paso Robles at the airport, which is only a mile or two from downtown, so very similar. 27 days, and that was a cooler year. 27 days reached 100 degrees, so that's quite few. Okay, 27 days can really impact the quality of your wine. In Napa, in St. Helena, saw 11 days at 100 degrees in 2019. I'm talking the entire calendar year, obviously most of them being in the growing season. Actually, even Pauillac, the birthplace of Cabernet Sauvignon in Bordeaux, saw 4 days at 100 degrees in 2019. Number of days at 100 degrees, by the way, in Calistoga was closer to 20, which is a lot harder than St. Helena. On Down Mountain, the entire 2019 years, we saw zero, not a single day reached 100 degrees. And if you look at the average temperature in the entire growing season, we're tracking 6 to 7 degrees cooler than Paso, 3 to 4 degrees cooler than Napa St. Helena, and thankfully 4 degrees warmer than Pauillac Bordeaux, which they had a terrible year, they didn't ripen. So we just had the perfect temperature because we're the only vineyard in California that's located 14 miles from the Pacific Ocean and yet at 2,200 feet elevation. So not only do you get the beautiful intense sun, not only you get that mountain fruit character, but you get the beautiful maritime influence with the fog coming in, caressing the vines in the fall. It's beautiful. Now let's go to 2020. As you know, it was a devastating year for California. Most wineries got really impacted by the smoke taint. 4 consecutive heat waves. I've never seen that from August, I believe, 13, all the way to October. 4 long heat waves, longer each one that we've never ever seen, and hotter than we've ever seen. So quite a bit of a warm vintage. Thankfully, we're one of the only wineries that has not gotten any smoke taint damage, zero. We test all our wines. And that's because our location, we're so close to the Pacific Ocean, the wind is always blowing from the west. So when the heat wave would come in, the smoke would come in from up north, would linger for a couple of days, then the heat wave would be over, and the wind would blow from the west and push it all east. So we were not affected by smoke taint, fortunately. But let's look at temperatures. Number of days at 100 degrees, downtown Paso, by the airport, in the entire 2020 growing season, 32. Okay, that's a lot. And Napa St. Helena saw 16 days. Calistoga saw way over 20. Now, average temperature, we averaged 86, despite all those heat waves. 86 degrees was our maximum average temperature throughout the growing season. Paso was at 91, 92, so 6 to 7 degrees warmer. Napa was 4 degrees to 5 degrees warmer. St. Helena, Calistoga was a lot warmer. So that tells you kind of what's unique about this climate. So we have the kind of climate that allows us to consistently, achieve ripeness every year, but at the same time, not overcook the grapes. So why is it that we call it a rare phenomenon? Because it's the only place on the planet where we find the soils of Europe, specifically Bordeaux, and the climate that resembles probably Oakville, St. Helena, in one location. Now, the big question is, what does it mean in the glass, Luke? And we're going to taste it, obviously, a little later, but what does it mean in the glass? Well, so there's a subjective way and an objective way to look at wine quality. Let's look at a subjective way. And I'm not complaining about the subjective way because critics love us. I mean, we get the highest ratings in the Central Coast, so by almost every critic. So I'm not complaining about critics. However, it's subjective, right? One critic could look at a wine saying, oh, I like the color. I think it's well structured. I'm going to give it a 97. One critic could look at it saying, no, I think I don't like the character. I think it's this and that. Here's 89, right? It's very subjective. We like to look at things more objectively. How do you analyze quality of a wine objectively? You measure what's called phenolics. What are phenolics? So when you take a glass of wine, there are 3 things that you do. The first thing that you do is you look at the color. The second thing that you do is you smell the wine. And the third thing that you do is you taste the wine. Now, even if you look at critics, the way they rate their wines is based on these 3 elements, right? The color, the concentration, the nose, and the tannin structure and the balance of the wine. So when you measure phenolics, it actually gives you a true objective metric on how good is your wine. Now, how do we know that higher phenolics correlate, not always, obviously the wine has to be balanced, correlate to better quality wine. And by the way, higher consumer adoption as well as higher ratings. Well, just look at France. It's black and white because over there they have bad vintages and good vintages. What is
Mhm.
the difference between a good vintage and a bad vintage? Well, the good vintage has more color, better tannin structure, better ripeness, right? Better nose. The bad vintage doesn't age too long. It's very weird in the bottle. It's not structured well. Uh,
Mhm.
the phenolics are lower. And even historically, even until today, French writers, when they write about a wine in France and a vintage, they will display the phenolics at the bottom because there's a direct correlation with better wine that has higher phenolics. Well, I tell you, and I don't want this to sound boastful, we've measured the 600 of the best Cabernet Sauvignon in the entire planet. Let's put it this way. The best one we've ever found is not even within 30 to 40% of what we get on that mountain. So so what that allows us to do is deliver wines at every price point that over deliver like a bottle of wine that you sell for 10 times more, which is one of the reasons today we're the fastest growing wine in the United States, because we have what we call it approachable luxury. And we're going to talk about those two wines next. Those two wines that we have in front of you are
Mhm.
embody the perfect definition of approachable luxury because they both provide the kind of phenolics that you'd have to spend $2,000, $1,500 on for a bottle of wine when you can get them for that price. So when people experience that wine, they have a hard time going to any other wine
Right.
because all they do then is to compare the intensity of these wines, which is why our company and our winery went viral really within 9 years. I mean, we've only launched about 9 years ago. Actually, we launched our state wines only 7 years ago. Um,
Wow.
and it has a direct correlation on consumer adoption, but also on ratings. If you take a look at the last wine advocate, Robert Parker, wine advocate, probably the most influential critic, still today. The last two ratings, we had the 8 best rated wines in Paso. 21 wines that we submitted out of 30 received 95 or higher. So people are wondering why? Because the wines at whatever price point way over deliver. So that's
Mhm.
in a nutshell the story. 13 years ago, I did a crazy thing. I packed my bags, moved up to our mountain. There was nothing. There were no vines, no power, no water, nothing. I erected a 1,000 square foot modular that had no water and power the first month or two, and I planted the first 26 acres myself. And I never looked back. It was a love affair. Today my brother and I are not only own the winery, but we operate it. I'm the winemaker.
Yep.
And I have 5 children. 4 of them are in the wine business or becoming winemakers. So we're multi-generational as well. And really, we love what we do. It's a labor of love for us.
So let me ask you a question. So are you telling me you make some pretty darn good wine at a Paso Robles?
Yes, I do. I do. And the surprising thing is we're having a huge impact
Mhm.
introducing California to the rest of the world. There's a négociant in Bordeaux. We gave him a soul of a line, sold everything we gave him, which is about 20 cases in 2 days. Just went like that because people are tasting the wine. This is the first time California wines are having such an impact
Mhm.
in Europe. France, we launched last year in September. They've already ordered 1,000 cases. I mean, we're shocked.
Uh,
France
uh,
never orders anything but French wines.
but isn't it amazing because Paso, when you were in San Diego, living there and stuff like that, Paso always kind of got a bad rap. It was Zinfandel, it was high octane, high fruit, kind of
Yeah,
flabby, high alcohol. And I'm trying a little bit of this Bodyguard, and I've had some other wines from Paso. That's not true anymore, if it even was true.
correct. So let me explain to you why this stigma that I remember about 13 years ago, there was such a term in industry that said it's a paso cab. It meant
Hmm.
it's overly
Yep.
extracted, it's overly jammy, overly
Yep.
alcoholic. Okay, that was a result of several different things. Let me walk you through them. The first thing, and I don't mean that in any way to be boastful or demeaning to anybody, faulty winemaking. Okay,
Hmm.
a lot of winemakers did not have the experience in making high caliber wines. Now, if you look at the last 10 years, there are top winemakers, many of them my friends, who have been recruited from places like France or like Napa that have come and become winemakers in Paso. I'll give an example. Jordan Fiorentini, a very good friend of mine, a dear friend of mine. She's an awesome winemaker. She was the winemaker at Chalk Hill. Okay, she's
Hmm.
now for the winemaker at Epic, making great wines. Okay, there's our neighbor, Adelaida Cellars, hired Jeremy Weintraub. He came from top wineries. in up in Napa as well, making cab. And today he's elevated the quality. So it's happening all over Paso where the winemaking is getting better. That's one reason. The second reason is, if you look at the history of Paso, it all started on the east side. And I know my fellow winemakers and friends who live on the east side, if they heard this, they're probably gonna send me some darts. But there is no comparison between the terroir on the west side of Paso and on the east side of Paso. And I'm saying that in a general way. There are some spots on the east side that really perform very well. But let's face it, an acre in the Adelaide district is almost 100 grand an acre or more. An acre in the east side, if you're buying 1,000 acres, is $5,000. I mean, very different climate. Yeah. You have to irrigate. You don't have calcareous soils. It's very hot, but the land is cheap. So what has happened the last 30 years? Well, when Paso got discovered, every Napa winery and every grower went out to the east side and planted clone 8s, which is productive clone for Cabernet, doesn't produce great wine, especially if you overcrop it. Overly watered and irrigated. They were looking to basically make a buck by selling inexpensive grapes and selling them to a lot of actually North Coast wineries that use those grapes in their wines. What happened right after that is that Rhone winemakers decided to camp out on the west side where there's a better terroir, started making Rhone wines. So everybody then automatically assumed, well, Paso is great for Rhone. It's a Rhone region.
Yeah,
they got it wrong, because when we arrived there, we said, no, it's not a Rhone region, even though it's great for Rhones. When you look at the Aleta district, we think it's a Bordeaux region. And everybody at first told us, you guys are stupid. You don't know what you're doing. Get the heck out of here. Go up north. What are you doing here? This is one region. We did. But let's fast forward, okay? 13 years later, what are the top 8 rated wines from the Wine Advocate? Ours, Cabs. We outperform, we outrate Saxum and all the other Rhone wineries. Yep. Because the wines speak for themselves. And that's not to bash any of these wineries. I think Paso has enough to accommodate all these different varieties. There are places where Rhones grow great. There are places like the Adelaide district, I believe is the best for Bordeaux varieties, maybe in the world. You go to Willow Creek district. I love Rhone wines from there. They really perform very well, especially at the lower elevation. You go east side, there are places where Petit Syrah does very well. So Paso is large enough to accommodate. There's enough, diversification in the soils and the climate that we can accommodate all these varieties. But that is the story. That is the story why, until we got there. Now, clearly Justin did improve, back in the 80s, they did release some good wines. Yep. Yeah. So they did do a good job there. But we took it to the next level. We took it to the level where, the highest rating any cab had ever gotten by the Wine Advocate when we moved there was in 1 year only, got a 95 points. It was Justin, 1 year. Since then, we've taken that to the 96 to the 100 on a yearly basis with a dozen wine. So it's really elevated the region. So so today people are big believers. And I'll share something confidential with you, but it's okay. I'll share it. I know we're on a podcast. At first, the Rhone guys hated our guts. What happened? Let's fast forward. 2 years ago, 3 of them, the top ones, and I won't mention their names out of fairness for them, came to me and in their own words, they said, you were right. We were wrong. We're planning cab. So you're going to see more and more people elevate the quality of Cabernet Sauvignon Paso, and that's the good news.
Now, let me ask you something. You've grown exponentially, okay, in the last couple of years especially. How do you keep, because I think some wineries kind of struggle. They get too big and the quality kind of goes. You guys are booming.
Correct.
You guys are absolutely booming. Quality, everything. As a winemaker and as one of the co-owners with your brother, how do you keep kind of the soul? I know we're going to try the soul line, but how do you keep the soul of what Daou really is? Because it really is
great.
Family estate. I don't want to say small because I don't want to say that because I don't want to insult you, but it's got that boutique style. How do you keep that as you keep continuing to grow?
That's a great question, Luke, and I'll be glad to answer. This is a question I get asked quite a bit. You're right. There is a winery 101 history book where every winery comes in, they do a great job by producing 500 cases. Then they get so successful, they start growing and the quality goes down. And unfortunately, I've had that experience. I used to collect wine for years. I still do. And I used to buy wines, and I won't mention the names, 30 years ago, and they were stunning. And then they got so big, I taste the wine. I'm like, what is this? I wouldn't pay 10% of what I used to pay for that. So how is it that we're not running into this problem? Well, it's very simple. I created a 5-level declassification system for our wine. So look, I'm here. I'm still making the wine. My children one day, very soon already, are making the wine. They will be making more wine in the future. So what if I leave one day and I decide, you know what, I'm getting older and I want to retire? How do we maintain this quality? Or how do we grow and maintain the quality? That's how we do it. I have a 5-level declassification system, and it's purely based on phenolic. So guess what? If one year I do a lousy job and I don't make a very good wine, then I don't bottle that wine if it doesn't meet the certain phenolics. That allows me to maintain the quality year after year. So there is no, subjectivity where Daniel thinks that, well, it's a tough year, but this is good enough for the year, let's bottle it. Hey, the burden is on me and on my kids when they make the wine. If we don't make certain phenolics, then guess what? It gets declassified to the next level down. Give you an example, 2011. The wines are not good, but they weren't quality of Soul of a Line. So I didn't produce a Soul of a Line. I declassified it and went to Cab Reserve, which ended up being great. So that is how we maintain our quality. We've learned how to scale by making sure we create metrics to keep us honest. And the metrics can never be broken. Not by me, not by my children, not by anybody who works for me. If we don't do a good job in a certain year, then the message will be, sorry, folks, but we did not do a Soul Line this year. We didn't do a patrimony. We didn't do whatever. And that's how we do it.
Now, let me ask you something. You've got some interesting names, and you don't seem like a pessimist. You got a wine named The Pessimist, okay? You got a wine that we're going to try called The Bodyguard. Were you a fan of like Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner or something? Or you got sold?
Actually, I was, but that's not what we call The Bodyguard.
So if
I was in love with Whitney Houston.
If you want to be Whitney Houston, I'll be your Kevin Costner. But then you've got like Soul of the Line. You've got Soul of the Line, which we're going to try too. We've got Eye of the Falcon. I guess, where do you guys come up with some of these names?
So it's always over a few bottles of wine. And then we start talking. And we come up with the craziest thing.
Right.
So I'll give you the story, a little bit of a summary of each name. So let's start with The Pessimist. As you know, this is a wine that is a little bit outside of the realm of the typical traditional view of Daou wines. It's got a little bit of residual sugar. It's a very enjoyable wine. It's, very fruity. So it's made in a different style, which is why we didn't call it Daou. We call it Pessimist by Daou, so that we don't want people to think that this is the Daou typical standard profile of the wines. If you really want to know our profiles, you want to taste our Cab Reserve or our Soul or a lot of the other wines we make. So why do we call it Pessimist? Well, it's a wine that does very well with millennials. We wanted to come up with a catchy name. I mean, it's like asking somebody, why do you call it Yahoo? I mean, imagine 20 years ago, somebody said, I'm going to come up with a company that's called Yahoo. They'd think, well, you are a Yahoo then for calling a company that, So Pessimist is catchy, and a pessimist is never disappointed. But I'll tell you, there's another person that said it in a perfect way. He works for one of our distributors. He said, I know why you call it Pessimist. And I say, what's that? Why is that? He goes, because I'd rather be a pessimist than a prisoner. So this is actually the second best-sold red blend in the United States today. It's received 90 to 93 ratings. Yep. It's received 90 to 93 ratings every year since we released it. And the best part about it, it's great wine that's affordable. I mean, I don't know what it sells at, where you're at, but around the $20 mark or so, you get 20, a 30, lot of wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get a lot of wine for that quality. So this is why it's so successful. It's half the price, if not less than that, than other wines in the same category of red blends. It has better ratings than theirs and sells for $20.
Yeah.
So can't go wrong with it.
Well,
let's talk about Bodyguard.
Hey, can I say, just wait, Dan? Can I say, how do you keep up if this wine, like the Pessimist, is doing so well, or some of your other wines are so well? How do you keep up with the demand so quickly? Because it's not like something you can just, like grape juice, you just turn it out tomorrow, or you go milk a cow and all of a sudden you got a whole bunch of cow, or how much cow? You have a whole bunch of milk. I mean, how do you keep up with the demand?
It's a great question. So over the last 6 or 7 years, we have had at least 100 different farmers that have approached us and said, we love what you guys do. We'll have a contract with you. You can plant it the way you want. You can pick the rootstock, the clone. You can manage it the way you want. and we'll plant it for you. We'll put the investment if you give us a long-term contract. So
Wow.
we have structured, I don't even know how many anymore, maybe 70 or 80 or 90 contracts all over Paso. And we're very picky about where the vineyards go. They have to be in the right location. They have to have the right clones. Then, we've created a special structure on how to manage these vineyards. That's been part of our success for non-estate wines. Now, for estate wines, we own 700 acres in the Adelaide district. We have, as of this year, we'll have about 240 acres planted of super high density and super high quality vineyards that all feed our estate and some of our reserve program. So those we have 100% obviously control over because they're ours. So that's how we got there. Look, we focus, great wines are made in the vineyards. If you start with bad grapes, it's bad news. So we focus on the right places. And I've had friends and I've had people come to me and they were very nice and they were very genuine. They're like, we'll plant, we'll do whatever you want to, but they're in the wrong place in Paso. And I'm sorry guys, but we don't grow grapes there. We're very limited where we grow our grapes in Paso. It's typically west side of Paso, El Pomar, which is the east side of Templeton, which produces great grapes, some parts of Creston, and that's it. We don't really use a lot of grapes from anywhere else.
Yeah. I like that you have a vision and you're keeping on it. You're not steering, you're staying on the line. And unfortunately, as you know, and the wineries I'm talking about, and to a certain extent, is they stray, right? Because I mean, let's be honest, the American palate, I mean, you're Lebanese, French, background. The American palate is you didn't grow up in the States, but I grew up in Canada. What did you grow up on? Fruit punch, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and what do all those lemonade? What do all those four have in common? They're sweeter, right? And it seems like a lot of these wineries, but a lot of these wineries are kind of going toward that. I mean,
that breaks my heart, Luke, because I cannot tell you how many wines I've tasted, high-end wines that have 4 to 9 grams of residual sugar. And by the way, I don't know what kind of sugar also went in there. I'm not going to say more. Okay. Let me tell you about these two wines in front of you. They are under 1 gram of RS residual sugar. Under 1, I think the soul may be under half a gram of residual sugar. 2 is considered dry. So you're drinking dry wines. Those 2 wines were made only with 2 things. Nothing was added besides our native yeast and nutrition for the yeast. So what you're really tasting is terroir. Let's talk about the names, by the way. You asked about the names. So I'll start with Eye of the Falcon. How about that? Because you asked about that one. Okay. It's a wine. So in 2015, I made this wine. And, it's so difficult finding a name nowadays because you pick a name and it resembles anything even close and you got to cease and desist and you got to go back to the drawing board. So, I pretty much, when my brother picked all of these names for the wines, when it came to Eye of the Falcon, I looked at our team and I said, you know what? I am so tired of picking names. I'm not going to pick this name. I'm gone. Let me know when the label comes. So they came back a week later and they said, we're going to call it Eye of the Falcon. I said, why Eye of the Falcon? They said, because we see you spend 3 to 4 hours every day in the vineyard and you're like a falcon that looks at every vine and knows every vine. I said, well, it's true. I feel like I know every vine on the vineyard. So that was a compliment. They called it Eye of the Falcon after me. I said, fine, I'll take it. No problem.
You know why they called it Eye of the Falcon? Because Eye of the Tiger was already taken.
Okay, I didn't know that. But
you know that song, Rocky, baby, Rocky.
Oh, of course. Of course. I as a matter of fact, I love this movie because, they asked Mr. T, is my favorite line in the movie. They go, what's your prediction for the fight? And he goes, prediction? Pain. So every year when harvest starts, I get all my teams together and I go, what's your prediction for the harvest? They all know me by now. They go, we know pain. I said, that's right.
Ain't that true? Well, let's talk about Bodyguard. Tell me about the name and let's talk about the wine too, because it's delicious.
Okay, so the name Bodyguard, thank you. The name Bodyguard, let's start with the name. We love the name. Obviously, Bodyguard is a great name. And most people, when they think of a bodyguard, they think of Kevin Costner or they think of a sturdy, big man who's going to be able to protect somebody, right? In our case, though, Luke, honestly, our mom was our bodyguard in our family. I mean, awesome. She shielded us all her life, protected us. And we basically, if you look at the label, it's an inspiration from the artist Klimt, and it's a woman shielding her children. Yeah. So it's a cool label, and we love the name Bodyguard. So we're like, hey, it works. So awesome. Now, why did I create this wine, and this is something that I really want to talk about this wine, because this wine is just stunning. When I give you the details, you're not going to believe it. So my brother calls me in 2017. I'm in the middle of harvest. He's in France. He FaceTimes me with some friends of his who actually are also distributors of ours. And he goes, "We've got a challenge for you." And I go, "What's the challenge?" He said, "Can you make a cult wine? A wine like a cult wine, like intense. Like, I'm sure you've had some cult wine like Sine Qua Non and others. They're super intense, super dark. He goes, can you make a wine like that, but anybody can afford?" I said, "Let me think about it." So what I decided to do, so over the last 10 years, I created a special technique, Luke, that is phenolics based, that's based on my palate. So most winemakers, when they're fermenting wine in tank, they don't know when to stop the extraction of tannins. So the wines are overly tannic, and then you got to lay them down for 5 to 10 years. What I've developed over the last 10 years is a technique that is based on my palate that allows me to know when to stop the extraction of tannins in the tank, and therefore really balancing out the wine, which is why all of our wines are approachable upon release. But then they'll age for 4 or 5 decades in some cases. They'll age a long time because of the high phenolics. So I decided to take on the challenge, and I picked 2 grapes. The first one, Petit Verdot, a grape that's a Bordeaux grape that is known for having a lot of phenolics, a lot of color, a lot of tannins. Most winemakers don't dare bottle it on its own. Why is that? Because it's too tannic and ends up being undrinkable. So they use it as a blender. It could be 3%, 2%, 5%, 15% even. And I picked another grape that comes from the south of France, mostly Petit Syrah, which in France actually doesn't exist. It's called Durif. When the grape was brought into California, the farmers looked at it. They go, "It looks like Syrah, but it's smaller, so we're going to call it Petit Syrah." But if you went to France and ordered a Petit Syrah, they look at you with big eyes saying, "We don't know what you're talking about. What is this? We never heard of it." The actual technical name is Durif. So I took these 2 grapes, applied my technique to it. Then, like all of our estate and reserve wines, these wines that you're looking at are 100% free run. Let me explain that. When you're making wine in the tank, at the end of the fermentation, when you open up the valve, the wine that freely runs out is the highest quality wine. Now in France, they learned 300-400 years ago, especially first growth wines, that they charge a lot of money for it. They only use free run. It's kind of like using only the extra virgin olive oil of olives. And when you go back and press more, it's no longer extra virgin. Anytime you start pressing to extract the rest of the wine from the must, you get harsh tannins, you get more potassium, so you have to add acid to stabilize the wine. You have to put fining agents. Then you're becoming a lab experiment. We didn't want to do that. So all of our reserve and estate wines, as well as the Bodyguard, which is really in the reserve expression line, do not use any press. What that means is we only get 80 to 100 gallons a ton versus 165 gallons a ton. So we get half the volume. That's how we're able to actually make the quality of wine that we are. Wow. What else? Well, because the tannins come from skin, they're smooth, they're elegant, they're plush, they're integrated. The minute you start pressing, those tannins get coarse, and you have to lay down the wine. You have to use all kinds of things to soften them. So this wine, let me put it this way, this wine has phenolics that are higher than 99.9% of every wine I've ever measured. 99.9. The color alone is 260 or 70 parts per minute of color. That's unheard of for a wine. I mean, most cabs in first growth in France are 150 to 180 parts. In Napa, most of them are 160 to 220. This is 260. It's immense. And it's elegant at the same time. It's got beautiful tannin. It's aged in 50% new French oak for 15 months. And the wine so over delivers on the price. It's not even funny. I mean, I tell people, put this wine against cult wine that you spend $300-400 on, and it'll give a run for its money because it's got better phenolics and it's more balanced.
Yeah. It's okay. You know what? I'm going to tell you something. That's really pretty. The thing I love about it, okay, it's sexy, it's elegant. You can drink it now, but you sure as hell can lay this down. Like this will last for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, without a question, this wine should be able to age decades. I mean, it's got the phenolics to be able to sustain it. When it comes to wines that have tannins, like Cab or Cabernet Franc or Merlot or Syrah even, it's not the acidity that allows the wine to age, unlike like a Riesling or a white wine that doesn't have any tannins. It is actually the tannin structure that allows it to age. So this wine has 1,300 parts of tannins. That's really up high, but you don't taste it because it comes from skin, and the tannins are very integrated. So it's a wine that we launched 2 years ago, and it's on fire right now because people are drinking it and
Delicious.
go, it's dry, it's bone dry, it's super intense, it's elegant, it's enjoyable, and it's affordable. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you
So
something. So
we'll
that was
go back. Yeah.
so that let me ask you a question. So, if you were to write a tasty note about you, how would that go?
Oh my gosh, you're putting me on the spot here. Obsessive compulsive, perfectionist, eccentric, but is filled with love.
Did Robert Parker write that one?
No, I just came up with it.
So I've got a
description.
I've got a tasty note from some guy named George. Okay, I think he's your brother and partner, actually.
Yes.
So this is what he wrote about you. So we like to do this kind of thing. We'll ask people. We've had some really funny ones. Carla Ramey did a great one on David Ramey. David Ramey. Elizabeth did awesome one on her husband, Tor Kenward. So the Danny wine is very deep in a beautiful red color, commanding a certain charming presence in the glass on approach with the scent of tradition and modernism combined with an aroma of luxury, quality, and taste. So unique that it raises your eye and curiosity to learn more about him. Only to find that in the glass of wine exists 100 years of history, artistry, and pleasure, and the feeling that this artist has many more paintings and stories to tell. What I got from that is your brother called you you're old.
That's why he's the marketing guy and I'm the farmer. That was a beautiful note.
That was pretty good.
Thank you for that. I've never heard it.
I think you must have got him something. You probably gave him something really nice for Christmas.
Oh, I always do. My brother and I are like one. We've had such a close relationship all our lives. He's my best friend, and I love him more than I love anybody in this world. We've had always a very close relationship.
Did you ever have to convince him to do? Because this seems like, was this both your passion? Was wine always a passion for your brother too? Did you have to convince him to do this?
I did. As a matter of fact, it's a funny story, but after 8 years of research, from the age of 32 or so till I was 40, at 40 years old, which was 15 years ago, I went to my brother one day and I said, okay, I just need to let you know, I'm moving to Paso, I'm starting a winery, and I'm becoming a winemaker. And the first comment are you crazy? He goes, have you ever been to a liquor store, a wine store, see how many bottles there are there? Why in the world would you want to do that? I go, because I'm passionate about it. And I believe that I can make the best cab in the world. And that's all he had to hear. My brother's always had a lot of confidence in me. The way him and I work are very much like the yin and the yang. So I tend to create the product and the strategy and the vision. And he is an ace at commercializing it, marketing it, finding ways to get in the market. That's not my forte, frankly. I'm like I said, he likes to say anything in the bottle is Daniel, and anything outside of the bottle is me. And that's very true on how we work together. At first he said, yeah.
No, go ahead.
At first he said, no way. He goes, no way, I'm not participating in that. That's crazy. It's a crazy project. I said, no problem. I just want you to know I'm doing that. Then he calls me next day. He goes, have you made wine? I said, yeah, I've been making wine for several years now, experimenting. And as a matter of fact, I made my first wine that I'm going to be selling part of my winery. He goes, okay. He goes, who is the best person out there to understand if this is good quality or not? I said, well, distributors play a big role. So he called me a couple hours later. He goes, okay, here's the name of a distributor. I talked to the owner. I know him from another connection. He wants to taste the wines. I called him, told him my brother is having a midlife crisis. He's becoming a winemaker at 40 years old. He goes, can you do me a favor and tell me if this wine is even worth? Because he's not an expert in wine, my brother. So I shipped those wines to the owner of Southern Wine Spirits, Wayne Chaplin. A week later, we got a phone call saying, we'd like to represent you in Nevada and California. Those wines are stunning.
Wow.
My brother said, okay, I'm in. So I moved to Paso. And at first, I have to tell you, he's a golfer and he's a polo player.
Yeah,
he wasn't 100%. He's like, yeah, I'm a golfer too. So he's like, oh yeah, nice. So my brother lives on the 18th hole at Pebble Beach, by the way.
Oh.
If you'd like to come play there, we'll set it up anytime. So my brother, the first 4 years until 2011, we would come up and spend a week, and we'd go back live in San Diego. In 2011, we lost. In 2010, we lost 3 family members: my sister
sorry.
and my parents. All
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. Within 13 months, and that made him really reflect on life. And I remember he came up to see me in 2011. He was at the winery one morning having coffee, and looked at me. He goes, "I get it." He goes, "This is always the life we've dreamt of." And we used to talk about this kind of life when we were 14 and 13, him and I. And we're like, we love nature, we love agriculture, we love the outdoors. So he moved to Paso and he never looked back. So that's how we got together on this.
Yeah, it didn't sound like it didn't sound like you had to really convince him. I think he just had to see from a business standpoint if it was viable. It sounds like the
Correct.
relationship you have with him, if you said I'm doing it, he would eventually jump in with you.
Correct. That is very true, actually. Very true.
So the soul of the lion, or soul of a lion.
Yeah.
Wow. Both of them, but wow.
So let me tell you, this is the wine that changed Paso. Look.
So where in Napa do you get the grapes for this?
Oh yeah. So actually, I'll tell you this funny story. It's funny you bring up the story, but I've had 2 great wine mentors. The first one was Delphine Barbeau from the winemaker at Chateau L'Evangile in Saint-Emilion, and Chateau Lascombe, where she still is now. So she was my first mentor. My second mentor is a gentleman by the name of Scott McLeod, who was the winemaker at Rubicon for 18 years. Very, very, very knowledgeable winemaker. He's not only a mentor, but he's a dear friend who at the beginning, obviously not anymore because I've had 16 hearts under my wings, but at the beginning he helped me out quite a bit. So I'll tell you the story about him. We had a lady whose name was Karen Hunt. She was the president of our winery. Okay. And she joined us and left Copa to join George and I when there were nobody. There was one person working for us, but she believed in the dream and she believed in us. So she asked me one day, she goes, I'm not an expert on wine. Obviously I drink a lot of wine, but I know somebody who I respect tremendously, and I'd like him to come and taste your wines to give me an idea what he objectively thinks. I said, by all means, send him over. So Scott McLeod calls me, and he was in Paso Robles. He goes, Karen Hunt gave me your number, and I'd love to meet with you. I said, by all means, I'm in the winery, coming over right now if you like. He goes, okay, I'll be over. So Scott comes in. He tastes the soul of a lion in the barrel. He takes a sample. He goes, you mind if I take a sample with me? He didn't tell me what he's doing or anything. I go, sure, I'll give you a sample. So he goes back to Napa. What I did not know back then is that he founded a winery called Wine X-Ray, which actually is the company that measures phenolics. He comes back a month later, gives me a call, and he's like, I'd love to meet with you. Are you in town? I said, yeah, I'm actually at the winery. He goes, I'll be over. I said, come on over. True story, Luke. He comes in, looks at me and says, okay, look, I'm a winemaker. You're a winemaker. Let's just level out here. Where'd you get these grapes from? Who'd you buy them from in Napa? That's exactly what you just told me. Wow. I said, no, they're not from Napa. He goes, it's impossible. He goes, then you bought some Napa juice. I said, Scott, this is 100% from here, from our mountain. He goes, I don't believe it. I go, why is that, Scott? He goes, well, you don't know what I do, but I measured every phenolics on every cab in the world. That's what I do for a living. I have a company called Wine X-Ray. And you can look it up, by the way, winexray.com. And I said, and? He goes, I've never seen phenolics like that. He goes, it's impossible. No way Paso can beat every cab in the world when it comes to phenolics. I go, well, welcome to that mountain. And he went out with a statement back then, 2010, we're talking, or 11. He came up with a statement that said, Daou, it used to be on our website, Daou will make a cab that will rival any cab in the world within 5 years. And he had a dozen phone calls from Napa winemakers and one person who used to run a big company, I won't mention which one, telling him, what the blip, blip, blip are you talking about?
We'll fill in the blanks.
His answer was always the same. Yeah, fill in the blanks. And his answer was always the same. Have you tasted the wine? And they would always say, no, we haven't. He said, well, you taste it, and then we can talk about it. So the first rating of this wine that came out created an earthquake in Paso, because no wine had ever gotten that kind of rating. It received 96 points. That's fast forward, and I'll give you the details of why this wine is so unique and where the name comes from. But I want to fast forward first and tell you, in the last 2 years, in a huge market like California, it's a huge market, okay? Soul of a Lion has outsold every Napa wine 2 years in a row, besides one, Opus One. That's the only one that hasn't outsold. But it's a third of the price too, don't forget that.
Right.
But it's outsold, and I won't mention the names, every Napa blue chip 2 years in a row. Why? Because the wine is stunning, and it's actually approachable price-wise.
Mhm.
It doesn't, it doesn't sell like those wines that it compares to that sell for 4 times more. So what is so unique about this wine? Well, let's start with the fact that it takes 9 years to make this wine. I've created a barrel just for this wine. If you actually go on my Facebook today, I posted a picture, or Instagram, I posted a picture of the actual wood. It's a special strain of French oak that my best friends in France who own the largest mill helped me create. It's a pink strain of French oak that is very, very rare, but that has incredible tannins. It's old trees that are over 300 years old, very rare stuff. I created a barrel just for this program, and it's cured for 5 years in the elements. So it's 5 years for the barrel to be made, a year in the vineyard, that's 6, 2 years for the wine in the barrel, now we're at 8, and almost a year in bottle, the bottle before it's released, that's 9 years. So it's a 9-year journey. This wine is aged in 100% new French oak. I use actually about 15 different cooperages, over 6 different forests, probably a dozen different toasts that I've created, and many of them were created just for me. So the complexity that comes from this wine is extremely unique. It's 100% free run, so we don't use any press. Mm-hmm. Everything about this wine, so it's always a blend of Cabernet. It is a Cabernet Sauvignon. I want to point that out to your listeners. For a long time we didn't put Cab on it, and people would, think it's a red blend, but it's actually a Cab. It's always more than 75% Cab. So it says Cabernet Sauvignon on the label, but it always has a little bit of Cabernet Franc and a hint of Petit Verdot to really fill the middle palate. So the wine is tremendous. It has received, by the way, 96 to 99 ratings every year from most critics, 10 years in a row. It is a wine that is so intense, but yet so elegant. It doesn't bite, it doesn't scratch. It is integrated because it's not a lab experiment. This is a true, pure expression of terroir. And it's a wine that is unfiltered, unfined. It is bottled the way it is. Nothing added to it besides yeast and nutrition for the yeast. And then the yeast, by the way, is our own yeast, which took 5 years to isolate on our mountain, and that today is used in over 35 countries worldwide. It's a very, very unique yeast that we discovered in our mountain, and we let other people use it. So it really is it's the quintessential Cabernet Sauvignon. And the best part about this cab, and I'll tell you because we've obviously had 10 years of experience with it, is when people drink it, they'll have a very hard time drinking their other wines. Very hard time.
I'm not
it will be like,
I'm not going home tonight. I'm just going to sit here and drink this.
It's a beautiful wine. It's a gorgeous wine that is just, it has got everything in it. It's perfectly ripe, not overly ripe. The residual sugars are always under 1 gram. Most of the years are under half a gram. So there is no residual sugar. Under 2 grams is considered dry, by the way, per Bordeaux standard. So unlike a lot of cabs from California, there are 3 to 9 grams. This is bone dry. The cork, by the way, has an insurance. We're the first winery, together with Schaefer, to introduce a cork that has an insurance on it. It can never be corked.
Really?
And so, yes. So we did that starting with a 2013 vintage. The largest cork company in the world, Armorim, spent millions and millions of dollars and 30 years of research to come up with a technology that screens every cork and that finds out if there's the chemical TCA, which causes the corked, effect. They approached us and Schaefer, and they said, you guys are the 2 best wineries we can think of to launch this program with.
Wow.
So since 2013, if you take a look at that cork, it has a DV on it that's Daou verified, that if you ever get a cork bottle of wine, send us back the cork. Obviously, we'll replace the bottle, but they will send it to the lab, and if it truly was corked, we'll get a reimbursement from insurance. That's how unique it is. The mold was created in Italy. The glass is made in Italy. We created the mold. So everything about this wine, from the bottle, the glass, the cork, obviously the wine, the barrels that we use, the yeast that we use, the phenolics, the ratings, everything is so unique that the reason why it's become the best-selling cab in California 2 years in a row is because people who can afford any kind of cab drink this wine and go, why would I want to spend 3 times more for something that's not as good? So they buy this wine. And that's why it's been so successful. Yes, please.
can I give you some feedback? I'm happy
Please.
I'm happy you quit your day job.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Yeah.
love to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, that is
Passion.
I'm going to be
I have
honest
such
with
passion
you.
toward wine.
I'm a Napa, I don't want to say a Napa purist, but I was not expecting that. I mean, this is gorgeous. I mean, I could drink that all day. I can bathe in that. I could bathe in that too, but I mean, that is just, like you said, velvety, elegant, great mouthfeel, awesome tannins. And that's gonna, and you could drink that now, but that's gonna lay down for some time. That's got some great years on it.
I agree. So the oldest one is 10 years old, and we do a lot of vertical tastings. And I tell you, it is still an infant. It's like youthful, like it just got bottled. Based on the phenolics on this wine, I wouldn't be surprised to see it age 40, 50 years or more, because it has more tannins than any wine I've ever measured on this planet when it comes to cab. But at the same time, it's balanced tannins, so it's not like overly extracted. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to lay some down. Like the 13 right now is drinking so good. The 14 needs more time. The 15 needs more time. 16 definitely needs more time, but it's drinking great as well. But, the 13 and the 10 are really drinking great. Now the 12 needs more time.
Yep.
So they all, I mean, could use a good 7 to 10 years, but that being said, you don't have to wait. You can drink them now.
No, you just, I want to touch on that. So you said the 10 and 17 you can drink right now. What makes you decide like the 10 and 17 can drink right now for some people that might not understand this? The 12, 13, 14, and 15 need more time. Why is that, if I can ask?
So the 10, what I said is the 10 and the 13, not the 17. The 17 is still very youthful.
Yep.
So they all drink good right now. But, if you think about the evolution of how a bottle of wine ages, especially when it comes to Cabernet Sauvignon or Bordeaux varieties, the way it works is the wine keeps improving to a certain point. And then it no longer improves, but it'll stay good in the bottle for a long time, right? So I think the formula is however many years it ages and continues improving, then it will continue aging for 2 to 3 times more time than that. So if 10 years from now, a bottle of wine is still improving or it's done improving, then there's a good likelihood the wine will age for 30 or 40 years. You understand?
It's kind of like marriage.
Correct. Not all marriages, some marriages, right?
Oh, okay. Excuse me. Pardon me on that one.
So the 2010 came from very young vines.
Okay.
The vines were 3 years old only.
Right.
And I almost I didn't think I could make a wine from 3-year-old vines. So I made it just for fun, thinking I'll put it in the reserve Cabernet.
Mm-hmm.
When I tasted it, I was so blown away. I'm like, no, this has to be bottled. So because of that, obviously it doesn't have the same complexity as a 17 or 16, which the vines now are, 12, 13 years older. So this is why I think it stopped improving, but I think it will stay good for 2 to 3 decades at 2010. The 13, I think it's drinking right now, but I think it could probably improve for another 5 to 7 years. But It is showing extremely well right now. There's this thing about the soul of wine that I've discovered to be so true. When you first taste the wine, like what you're tasting right now, right, in the first 5 to 7 years, you taste some terroir when it comes to the soil, but you're tasting mostly the climate. When the wines get to about 7 years old or so, you start tasting the earthiness. You start tasting the complexity of the terroir. It's almost like a different wine. Last year I was with my fiance at the Belmont Hotel in Santa Barbara, and they had every vintage of Soul of Wine, so I ordered a 13. The sommelier comes in, pours me the wine, pours me the glass, and I've had this wine countless times. I tasted the wine. I looked at Sarah, my girlfriend, and my fiance, and I said, I don't think that's our wine. She goes, what do you mean? I go, it doesn't taste like anything I remember. I mean, I could taste, you should have, if you would have told me this is a Bordeaux wine that's 15 years old, I would have believed it. All I got is beautiful earthiness and minerality. And then I called the sommelier. I go, can I look at the bottle? I looked at the bottle, looked at the cork, and it was indeed our wine. I'm like, wow. So I'm noticing, given that the oldest soul wine is only 10 years old, that after about 7 years or so, you really get that soil emphasis, the minerality, the earthiness, and the fruit diminishes a little bit. So you really get a super elegant and complex wine that is very earthy, that represents the true expression of the soil.
Awesome. So we're gonna, Daniel, thank you so much. We're actually gonna add, we're gonna stick around for a little bit right after this. So I want to ask you a couple more questions for our Patreon site. Awesome, Daniel. Awesome. So thank you so much for being on the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.